Rachel, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. Happy to be back.
So I'm also super excited not only to have you back for a second time with us, but also about the topic that we're going to be discussing today, which is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
So tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Rachel Kuhlen. I work as a keynote speaker. I'm in a training company and I do executive coaching. I am passionate about living in integrity and living with intentionality. Some of my biggest values are around solitude, novelty, nature, self-actualization. And in the long term, my goal is just to continue to chip away at becoming the best version of myself and working on the things that I need to work on so that I can show up for myself and for those around me.
That's so great. And you do show up for those around you. Um, so you kind of switched gears since the last time that we've talked, and you've now kind of dove into the emotional intelligence realm, right?
Yes. So when we talked last, I was doing a lot more relationship coaching, and slowly the realization came that it's all about emotional intelligence. And whether it's relationship coaching, training, keynote speaking, it's about raising our level of emotional intelligence, growing in awareness. And so I shifted my organization and my company to really focus on that and the clientele that we were going to work with. So yes, somewhat same, but in a different space. And I'm loving it.
I'm so happy to hear that. So I really see emotional intelligence. This is such a vitally important topic. And I feel like it's been missing from the corporate world for a really, really long time. Like we weren't allowed to bring our feelings into things or talk about our feelings. You couldn't come in and talk about something based on your feelings. So I really think it's so great that you are out there and you're bringing awareness to what emotional intelligence is, as well as really kind of driving home the point that this is a positive way that we can all amplify our impact in the workplace. So let's start with setting some definitions. What is emotional intelligence, or as some people call it, EI or EQ?
EI or EQ. And I love what you said. Yes. So organizations and people spend a lot of time avoiding emotional intelligence. We didn't want to talk about feelings. HR was like, don't ask any personal questions. But the realization is we're all human beings, and organizations want to see behavior change. They want to see growth. They want to see great things. Well, we can only do that if we're addressing the whole human being. So emotional intelligence is really a group of components that comes together. There's self-awareness, there's self-regulation, there's empathy, there's motivation, and there's social skills. Sometimes they're called different things, but it's how we bring all those things together and start to show up, like we talked about, is the best version of ourselves. So how do we bring self-awareness into the workplace and self-regulation and start to learn and grow and create awareness so that we're changing the way we're looking at things, we're changing the ways that we're doing things, thinking a little bit more about our approaches, and in the end of the day, really showing up, like I said, is the best version of who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been hearing a lot more about emotional intelligence recently. Why do you think this is?
I think it's back to the fact that we're all human beings. And if we want to see change, we have to look inward first. And we can't just tell people what they need to do. And we can't just you need to learn this skill or you need to do this thing better to become the best version. We have to look inward first. And it's continuously number one, the top 5 skills that companies look for. We're hearing more about it because I think we're starting to approach people in a way. Maybe this is, for example, mental health, for example. A few years ago, we didn't talk a lot about mental health, and slowly we started to talk more and more about mental health and depression, and anxiety, and how that shows up at work, absenteeism, presenteeism, all these things. And we're having bigger conversations about things than we used to have. And emotional intelligence, that same component. We're having much bigger conversations about the whole human being, who we are, what's going on, more now than we were willing to have even just a few years ago. And so that's why we're hearing more and more about it, because it really is the root of everything. It's the foundation of everything. It's the groundwork for everything that we do.
Right, right. So you mentioned absenteeism absenteeism and presenteeism. Expand a little bit around what each one of those are.
Yeah. So when you think about absenteeism, I'm not showing up. I'm not showing up to work. I'm sort of checking out. And presenteeism is, yeah, I am there. Like maybe I am there, but I'm mentally not there. Like I'm not focused on my work, or I'm not focused on the conversation I'm having the person that I'm with. Like I might be physically present, but I am not really wholly present. So
Right.
that happens a lot, absenteeism, presenteeism, and why we do that and what's going on beneath the surface. And that's all that emotional intelligence piece, so that we are showing up, right? So that we are being present in the moment with those that are around us. So yes, that's what absenteeism and presenteeism are.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that each individual is on a spectrum as far as where they are, as far as the knowledge around each one of these components, and also kind of like how well they're using the skills with each component. Would you agree with that?
Oh yes. Everyone is on a different, is in a different space, and not necessarily ahead or behind. They're just in a different space.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also imagine that learning and utilizing these skills would also help you in your life outside of the corporate world. Seeing is that these are actually kind of like life skills.
Yes, yes. You nailed it right there. Like whereas I spend my time in the corporate world, these are life skills. These are just like people, human being skills that anytime we're raising our level of emotional intelligence, we're able to affect both our personal life, professional life, our relationships, our relationship to self. Like everything gets touched when we start to make these small changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this 4-part guest series that we're going to be doing, we're going to be diving deep into each of the components of EQ. And today's episode, we're going to focus on what seems to me to be the foundation component, which is self-awareness. So how would you define self-awareness?
So self-awareness is really two things. So self-awareness consists of two components. There is the internal self-awareness, like knowing me, self-knowledge, like who and how I am. So there's an internal component, and most people think that is self-awareness alone, but self-awareness also consists of an external component. So it's knowing how other people perceive me, what's going on in the external world, and both are equally as important when we're thinking about self-awareness as a whole. It's not only just knowing myself, but how other people are perceiving me. So that's how I would define self-awareness.
So when you talk about, there's this like internal self-awareness and then this external self-awareness. So that's all around how people are like perceiving us as we move through the world or at work. But yet in society, we receive a lot of messaging around, you need to stop caring what other people think about you, or you need to stop caring about how other people perceive you. And so touching on this within the emotional intelligence context seems almost antithetical to the things that we are hearing out in society.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. And it's not caring what everybody thinks by any means, right? But it's recognizing and knowing, how am I perceived? The people that my peers, my mentors, my close relationships, those around me, those maybe that work for me, like how am I perceived? And it's because the knowledge that we get from that, right? The knowledge can help to shape and improve our communication, how we're talking to other people. It helps improve people who exhibit high external self-awareness. For leaders, for example, like they're respected more, they're seen as more capable people, and just taking that feedback that we get from the people that are close to us that we value, and sort of, I guess, you rumbling with it, like, all right, so what does this mean if this is what's really going on, so that we can make a change. And that's the thing with self-awareness that's so funny and ironic, is we all think we're self-aware, right? We're all like, yeah, I'm self-aware, right? But statistics show we're really not self-aware as a group. And we've all met people that are not self-aware. So it's like statistics show that it's not there. So it's just creating a bigger knowledge. All right, so what do certain people think about me, and how am I showing up, and how can I make differences or change the way I'm doing so that I can improve myself and my relationships with others. And but to your point, like, no, like what everybody thinks. Like, be on the floor, I'm sure, if I read all the feedback, right? You'd be like, oh gosh, I'm the worst person in the world. But it's not about what everybody thinks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certain.
It makes me think about the, Brene Brown and her quote of, when she's talking about the people that she allows to offer her criticism or about her work. She's like, I don't take any sort of criticism from the people who are not in the arena, doing the same work, doing the same hard things with the dirt on their face. And every day is the battle climbing into it. That's what that makes me think of. Like, that's how she chooses the people that she allows in to give her feedback about her performance.
And it makes sense, right? Like if someone's doing the work too, and they're also trying to find their way, they have a different empathy and space to be able to share with others, right? Versus like, you just need to change this about you, but they're not doing the work themselves. That comes off a little bit different versus like, I'm in it too, right? And we're all working on ourselves. And that comes, it just feels like it's coming from a very different space, less judgment.
Yes.
I'm here to support, less like, if you did this better, then everyone would like you. That's a very different type of feedback. And I love that Brene Brown says that because it's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody was wondering, how would I go about eliciting this information from the people that I work with, how they perceive me, how would they go about doing that other than just the probably awkward, blunt ask of, hey, how do you perceive me?
I think there's great ways to like reframe the conversation. And something that I use is give me one opportunity that I can work on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It sounds non-threatening. It's, it gives someone an opportunity like, hey, you know what? When you go 48 hours without responding, it can be a little frustrating for me to do my job. All right. That's just give me an opportunity. They're not necessarily talking about me as a person, but all right, then me as a person, I could think about, all right, how am I showing up and why am I not being responsive maybe, or maybe there's a pattern of lack of responsiveness or some things there that I could be thinking about that's keeping me from responding quickly. So give me an opportunity. Tell me something that you think that I could work on myself. Any of that sort of soliciting the feedback instead of, because most people in situations, depending on the situation, especially if you're in a boss and employee situation, giving feedback to your boss and be like, I don't want to give you feedback. So it's like, the boss, you're like, oh, so give me something. Tell me something that I could work on. Tell me something that I could improve. What can you give me one thing, right? Just one thing, and making it really hands off. And I think we could do that with people that are close to us too. Hey, just tell me something that you think I could work on. And I love, I take Kabbalah, and there's a Kabbalah class early on in Kabbalah 1 where you call somebody and you ask them this question, like, but you ask them like, tell me something you don't like about me. And this is a close person, right? Close person that you call, and it's very interesting because what you think people think about you might not, and these are close people, like these are friends, people that I spend, a lot of time with. And I was shocked. I asked my husband the same question. He refused to answer. So we're going to get there. But
which might be the same reaction from your boss.
But I mean, it's only my ego that's going to be, that's going to be like, oh God, I want to feel like I'm right all the time or I'm perfect. And that's just ego, right? That's not what we need when we're trying to grow as a person.
Yes. And would you offer that same tactic to somebody maybe who is a leader wanting to get feedback from the people who work under them about getting information about how they're being perceived?
Just give me a piece of feedback, or give me one thing I could work on, or give me an opportunity that I could work on myself. Yeah, it's a simple, easy question, non-threatening. They're possibly talking about a thing, right? And not necessarily, and it doesn't come across as you. And I think even coworkers, hey, what's something I could be doing differently? What's something I could be doing better? And just hearing what they have to say. But to your point, being mindful about who we're asking.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that like the 360s are commonly used in the corporate environment, but I think from my own perspective of having done them for my bosses, I think there's a fear in people of actually being honest on those because they say they're anonymous, just like the employee engagement survey is anonymous. And then somehow, some way, a leak happens and word for word things get put out. And it's like, well, I thought that was supposed to be anonymous, and it comes back to the person who said it. And so now everybody's like, don't put the real answer on there. Don't say what you really think, because they do know who you are on the other side of that survey.
Yes, I agree with you. People can be very hesitant to tell like the full truth about certain things. and which isn't getting us the right type of feedback. I still think though, and this is all part of self-awareness, people will still say, they might not say it to the extent of what they really want to say. And it's incumbent upon us to maybe read through the lines a little bit, maybe just process like, okay, they might not say the truth, but like there's something there. It's like there's always truth hidden in it somewhere, and it might not come across as this is the exact thing and exact quote, but there's incumbent upon us to read and look at it to say, all right, maybe there is some truth, even if it's said in a nice way or in a way that doesn't seem as threatening or whatever, that like, okay, something to work on.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, then that just comes down to psychological safety at work. And,
Yeah.
and that's like a whole other topic of conversation. But yes, these are a common method and they're not always, bulletproof.
Yep, absolutely. So just like emotional intelligence has become kind of like this buzzword, I think self-awareness as well has kind of become this hot topic. And so I even see it kind of outside of the context of emotional intelligence, just self-awareness in your life, self-awareness around who you are, how you're showing up. And so when I think about that, why do you think that is coming to the forefront as much as well?
I think it just is we're evolving in conversations as humans and thinking deeply differently about the way things were. I think society's in a different place to talk about these emotions and feelings and thoughts. And I think we recognize patterns differently of behavior and sabotage. And like I said earlier, like these conversations are starting to be had on topics and things that they were never talked about before, right? I mean, I can even think of my mom's generation, like you just did the thing, right? No emotion, no, like we didn't talk about feelings or anything. And now we realize the importance of being able to express and put words to things and the right words to things. And I think self-awareness is just part of that.
Yeah.
Part of that space where we're becoming more cognizant and aware of things that we're doing, and we're able to, and thank God for science, like we're able to put, sometimes we think we're an anomaly and now we can put a name on something, and not that that's right, the label, but we can sort of, okay, I'm all right, I'm normal, or this is, I sort of fit into this space. Oh, this is why I do this thing, or yes, this is the behavior that I'm always sabotaging myself. Oh, maybe it's this. And if we're just getting better and better and better at figuring ourselves out.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think we get wrong about self-awareness?
That we all think we're self-aware. and that we don't need to do anything when it comes to self-awareness. They're like, oh, I got it, I'm good, I totally know, I know myself, and I know what other people think about me, and thinking like that all right, I'm done, instead of realizing it is a continuous journey in self-awareness. And the more layers we peel back, the more awareness create, there's just bigger things underneath that need to be worked through and navigated, and new things. And I think the biggest misconception that people have is that, no, I got it, I'm good.
Yeah. So Dr. Ehrlich's research study
Yeah.
dove into this, right? To figure out like, what is self-awareness? How are we practicing self-awareness? And she found that only 10% of people are actually practicing self-awareness correctly.
Yeah. When they were looking at it, it was great. When you look at that study and they look how they set up the study to define like, what is self-awareness and what makes somebody self-aware? And they looked at the data and the way the questions were answered by the person, the way the questions were answered by the people about the person, and matching it all up to find that, yeah, like only 10 or 15% of people are practicing self-awareness correctly. And there was a lot of great information that came out of that study. But one of the things I thought was like really simple was that people who are self-aware ask what questions. What could I be doing differently? What's another option? What's another choice? What's another way to look at this? Like, what's something I can be doing, and just asking what questions, because why isn't a very good self-awareness question, although it can help us to get to root causes. What keeps us moving forward? Which
I pulled, go ahead. No, go ahead. Please. I pulled the same thing out of listening to that TED Talk. And what kind of came up for me was that, I think why is looking for like a causality. It's looking at like, why do I do this thing in certain situations, or why is my behavior this way? And it gets you kind of either stuck in the place that you are, or looking in the rearview mirror saying like, okay, I'm paying attention to the stuff that happened in the past. And then you're getting stuck in that place of like looking in the past and staying there. Whereas what questions typically lead to some sort of action. What can I do about this? What can I try next? And that leads into this action that gets you moving forward, instead of just sitting in the why of maybe why you're doing the things that you're doing, or why you're in this circumstance again.
Yeah. And I think the why is important. Like, I don't want to say neglect the why, because I think for some people, the why needs to be navigated through, right? And that can be important. And the part of why, but not getting stuck in why and using that as an excuse or reason not to use the what to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Is where we don't want to go, right? But I think why can be very important, especially if we have sabotaging behavior, or we keep repeating patterns over and over and over again. Like, something's going on, and it doesn't matter how many what questions we might use moving forward. If the why is not getting solved, which is why emotional intelligence isn't just self-awareness, it's all the other components as well, because when we fit them all together, we can start to get to those other pieces to navigate through.
Yeah. And I really think that this is kind of, this is, to me, highlights. I've noticed that therapy in combination with coaching is such a powerful combination for anybody who's trying to do the work on themselves, because the therapist works with the why and going back into what started this pattern, or where is this behavior coming from? And then the coach is there to pick up and say, okay, now we got that. Now we're moving forward. We've got this future focused lens that we want to move forward. And that's where the what starts coming into it now. So now that you know this, what can we do to start making changes, right?
And therapists are great what people too, right? But we go to them for a lot of the why, right? Like why, and we sort of see our therapist as that, but they're great what people too. But navigating through that sometimes is necessary. And that's why always seeking, medical support or help or things is important as you're going through this process, if you need to, because things might be coming up that are causing us to get stuck, and we would need that support.
Yeah. So when we think about how people come to develop self-awareness, and when I think about it's being talked more and more about, how do I become more self-aware? There's also talk around be careful when you start the self-awareness journey, because there's going to be things that you have to change about yourself, or you're going to figure out things about yourself that maybe you don't like so much. I think that we all have to come into it. There's going to be some hurdles. And I think one of those hurdles, at least that I've experienced as I did my own self-discovery around self-awareness, is that a lot of times it involves identity shifts and identity changes. Yes. Have you seen this too?
You are going to change, and people are going to notice, and there's people in our lives that might not like it. They might push back on it. There are friends might not understand. And like I said before, I don't want to think of it's in a head behind thing. You're just in a different space.
Yeah.
And so for some, the thought of I'm going to change and what's going to happen and what's going to happen to my relationships, or does this mean I'm going to end up getting divorced, or I'm going to lose this friend group? I wouldn't worry about that, right? Just go on the journey, but also recognize that people like us just the way they are. It's very comfortable for them. Right. And there is the journey in self-awareness will get very lonely, because there will be a point where the who you were hasn't met the people and the spaces and the situations of where you're going yet. And you don't have your new friend group, or you might not have the new friends or the new environment or the new space, but you're not quite in where you were either. And it can be it can feel, I don't want to put loneliness, it's going to be lonely, but you are going to have hurdles like you talked about, because any change, you are shedding a part of your life, and quite made it into the new space yet either. So I think Brene Brown calls it the messy middle, or
Mhm.
like act one is great. You're like, I'm really excited. I'm going to go on this journey. And then like act two is in the middle of the dark tunnel,
Mhm.
and you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. You know, you could turn around, but you don't really see the light there anymore. So you're stuck in this darkness until you keep moving forward and seeing the light at the other side of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So yes, and our brains are predictability machines. They like our comfort zones, they like our habits, they like our belief systems, they like our rules, they like our stories, because we've created identities around them. And to
Yes.
embed those identities um, can feel intimidating for some.
Yeah.
First, thinking about it, like, I'm excited to go on a journey. I don't know who I am or where I'm going to end up, but I'm excited just to figure it out, and shifting that, reframing that into a thing of like, listen, this is all going to be good, and it's all going to work out, and I'm going to show up with certainty, and I know I'm going to have stumbling blocks and hurdles and dark spaces, but I'm excited to find me,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's something just so incredibly beautiful and powerful in that.
Mhm. It is very disorienting, I think, especially when there's an identity piece involved in it. I mean, even just the choice to change something about yourself is very daunting. And it's hard. It's hard work that you have to do. Um, but you talk about doing things in like 1% shifts, or
One degree
make
shifts.
it super small, right?
Super easy. So I use this example when I speak a lot, that imagine you're on an airplane, right? And you're in your first class seat, and you got your drink of choice next to you, and you're leaving Las Vegas, and you're headed to Orlando, and you got your earphones on, and you're listening to great music or watching a movie. And that captain decides that every 5 minutes they're going to move the plane or shift the plane 1 degree. Like, you would not feel it on the airplane. Like, even if you were trying to feel it, you wouldn't feel it. But after 5 hours, you wouldn't end up in Orlando. You would end up in Miami. All this to say that just like 1 degree shifts over time, small shifts, just chipping away, have massive impact in our abilities to show up and to learn and to grow. We often think we need to make wholesale shifts. And I'm not saying there are not spaces in our lives where we have to make immediate wholesale shifts. And like, we do
Right.
that. I think, you can speak to those. I can speak to those, but
Mhm.
just what's the next best decision? What's the next best thing I can do? Maybe that's pausing when I feel triggered. Maybe it's having a glass of water. Maybe it's
Mhm.
doing 30 seconds of squats while the water is warming up for my shower. Just small 1 degree shifts in the right direction, and over time have massive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the idea of that, because I feel like so many times we try to make these like big sweeping changes in our lives all at one time. And a lot of times those do include these shifts or changes in identity. And as soon as your brain registers this, it's like the amygdala is like, oh, no, 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 we're not going to do that. We're going to keep you right here, safe
Yes,
and comfortable.
yes.
And so I think taking those smaller steps, while they feel like very inconsequential at the time, they compound over time. And before you know it, over time, you've made this really big change in your life. And it didn't seem like it was just this like magnitude of, I have so much to change, I have so much work to do, because that will put you into overwhelm faster than I know. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Or your brain loves that. It's like, oh, we'll just stay nice and comfy right here. Like,
Yeah.
this is great, and big shifts, just making big shifts doesn't necessarily make we're making big changes. I mean,
Mhm.
we can make shifts, but like we take ourselves there too. And I guess to say that, like, the work is internal. Like, there are
Mhm.
situations where we need to leave or go or do or whatever, but the
Yeah.
work in that space is internal, and it can feel daunting. And then 1 degree is
Yes.
small. And
Yes.
I think too, and we've talked about this, your core values, people are like,
Mhm.
well, I don't even know what or who or what am I protecting. And for me, recognizing my core values, not the values I grew up with, not like my
Mhm.
professional values, but like the ones that like resonate with me, that make me exhale and drop my shoulders and feel really comfortable in them. Like, that's what I'm protecting. That's what I'm working towards. That's
Right.
it's going to be sort of that the foundation which I'm going to build all this self-awareness on. So for example, for me, nature and solitude are really big core values for me. And not that like honor or commitment or family aren't important, because they are, but like core in essence to me, I need these things. So when I'm making choices and growing in my self-awareness, like how am I sticking to those? How am I living in those? How am I choosing those things for me and making those small 1 degree shifts that allow me time for solitude,
Mm-hmm.
time to get into nature, time for self-actualization. And because what else are we building on, right? The idea, sure, like we're going to grow, but like for what? Like, what am I gaining? Like, what's really at the end of this rainbow that you're telling me to walk through?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
the response.
absolutely. So somebody is listening to this podcast and they're asking themselves the question, and maybe this is twofold. What would be some qualities that we would see in somebody who is self-aware?
They tend to be very adaptable. They tend to be good problem solvers. They tend to be sort of level when it comes to reaction about things. They have just sort of this knowing about who they are. They're not, they make decisions in alignment with their values. You know, when you see it, it's almost like the same things people have when they have resilience. Like they just have this space about them. They take care of themselves. They take care of their mental, emotional, physical well-being. They don't neglect that. So those sort of things like adaptability, problem solving, self-care, like my ability to stay level and calm in situations, like that is a level of self-awareness that allows us to do that.
Okay. And then the flip side of that, let's say somebody who maybe realizes that there isn't a whole lot of self-awareness, or maybe they think they have self-awareness, but they're looking at themselves and saying, how do I know if I have self-awareness?
Yeah, well, listen, we if we're asking ourselves the question, that's the great start, right? Like, all right, I'm self-aware enough to ask the question of, do I have self-awareness? And it's really, I mean, it's really your journey into how much, into how, you know, where you're going to go and what you're going to do and what you want to focus on. And if you're asking the question, I would say you have self-awareness. If you have like, I have never thought of that question in my life, it doesn't necessarily mean you don't, but now is an opportunity to think about it, if that makes sense. Would you agree,
Yeah.
or what would you say?
No, I would agree. And I think, the other thing that I think when people ask that question, am I self-aware? And they're kind of taking that stock into it. I almost feel like they think it's like a one and done, right? Like once I get self-awareness, then I'm good. Like I've got self-awareness forever and ever and ever. And it's not, it's not this destination that you just like, oh, I've arrived at self-awareness and now I'm going to be self-aware in every aspect of my life. Because I think like you say all the time, you're like, life is going to keep throwing things at you that are going to test you and challenge you in the realm of self-awareness.
Constantly. And you will move past things that you might have not moved past as quickly, but like before you maybe got stuck on a topic or something about, you know, a belief about something, and you find yourself, maybe now I've moved past that much easier. Like I don't find myself needing to argue my point or win conversations, or, you know, you find yourself, but then the situations get a little more complex, right? And then triggers come up, or well, things happen and we sort of revert back into who we were. And then we start to, like I say, just chip away at those things, because life just keeps coming at you. And even myself, I'm sure you could say too, like, I talk about this every single day. Like I am in this space every single day. And yet every single day there were things I'm like, oh, I'm not being, I catch it. I catch it a little
Yeah.
different. I'm about to react to something, or I'm like taking something a certain way, or like my ego is doing something, and I have to catch myself and be like, all right, hold on. What's going on? What do we need to, what's happening? And yeah,
I think definitely like dropping into the present moment, like stopping and really getting present with yourself in that moment. I think it's like what you're kind of talking about,
yeah,
where you're just doing that check-in, right? To be like, okay, where am I? What's going on thought pattern wise? What am I doing? Where's my attention going? And then kind of, bringing that in. And I do think it's a practice. I think much like if you want to start a meditation habit, you have to make it a habit by practicing meditation every single day. Self-awareness is the exact same thing. You just have to keep setting yourself up to take the moments where you can stop, pause, be in solitude and say, what could I have done differently in that? Or how did I show up in that? Or was that a pattern coming back up to the surface again? What was the trigger? Taking
Yeah.
the time to really get to know yourself in that.
Yeah. If I find myself ruminating on certain conversations
Mhm.
I've had, replaying arguments over, preparing for an argument, I think ruminating on things, like all that stuff is an opportunity for us to be like, all right, brain, like, why are we sitting on this? What's going on?
Mhm.
Is there a need that's not being met? Is there a boundary that maybe needs to be drawn? Is there a value that's not getting the attention that it needs? And just having those mindful moments
Mhm.
instead of allowing ourselves to spin out of control, you know, think obsessively about certain
Mhm.
things, all that. It's an opportunity for us to just be like, all right, and it could be a quick end of the day, getting into bed. What's one thing I could do different? And I think
Yeah.
we sometimes think it's like these big things, but yeah, I was in the grocery store behind this person who was writing a check, and I find myself getting all like, and it's these little moments are important, right? They're important to
Mhm.
be like, you know what? I could have practiced some deep breathing. I could have read the headlines of the magazines that were right
Yep.
there. I could have done something else besides just like thinking about how much time this person in front of me is
Yeah.
wasting
Yeah.
mine, right? Small little things. It doesn't always have to be
Yes.
huge,
Yes. And I
big
think when
moment.
you get into these overwhelming, ruminating thoughts, I think of the book that you had recommended to me, Martha Beck's The Way of Integrity.
Yeah.
Because in that she talks about, when you get into these spaces where everything feels so big and it feels so heavy, to
Yeah.
take a step back, go into that moment of presence where you're there with yourself and you say to yourself, but I'm okay right now.
I'm okay right now.
Just brings it right back down to baseline.
Yeah. In this very moment, it's such a freeing thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
Just like when she talks about like, I need help, like a very freeing thing to say that's like, but right now I'm okay. And sometimes we don't even, and this is all a part of self-awareness, we don't even realize that we are ruminating or we are
Yeah.
overthinking because it's become such a habit in our head.
Yep.
It
It's our
feels so,
norm.
it's your norm. You don't even,
Yeah.
it's like taking there is no moment to think about, there's nothing there. So it's very
Yeah.
interesting. Yes. I'm glad you brought up Martha Beck. Fabulous book.
Yeah. Which I think a lot of that time when we go into the ruminating or we're thinking about things and we're not even realizing it, that's when we're in autopilot.
Yes.
So like, I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get to the motivation point, talking about conscious versus subconscious, what's running the show. Autopilot is your subconscious running the show.
Who's running the
And
show?
as hard as we try to be conscious, I don't know that there's anybody that can be conscious all the time. But it is so easy to fall into that autopilot subconscious. So finding ways to break that rhythm, whether it be a reminder on your phone to do like a conscious check-in. What am I doing? Where's my attention? If I'm lost in thought, what am I thinking about? And just starting to catch those times. And the more you practice it, the more it becomes kind of a natural thing that you do without even really having to have the alert on your phone.
But it all goes back to like bringing ourselves present and like, okay,
Yes.
I just need a moment. And our brains are,
Yes.
for good reason, are wired a certain way, right? We have to do things on autopilot because if I had to spend every moment thinking about every single thing, I would like never get out of bed. Like if I like brushing your teeth and like taking like the things that we sort of run because it frees up our brain for bigger, more complex tasks or things that need to happen. So, but to your point, like, all right, let's just check back in for a second. Like, what is going on in that brain right now? Yes.
Yeah. Super important to do. So when we talk to people about how to develop self-awareness, you have mentioned your like identifying your core values is a good way to start around that. That's becoming more present in your day-to-day life. And in your workshop, you share 4 steps: notice, pause, listen, and introspection
Yeah.
around cultivating self-awareness in ourselves. So speak to those.
Yeah. And that's like notice, right? Like, let's just notice. Let's get present. let's get present in the moment, see what's going on. What's my brain thinking about? How am I showing up right now in this moment? Just creating some space for self-awareness. That pause, they talk about the power of the pause in all sorts of aspects in life, negotiation, work. But there's a lot of power, and there's a lot of power in just pausing and like taking a second.
Yeah.
And then we talk about introspect, like, all right, ask myself maybe just one question, like, what's going on right now? Like something quick, like what's going on? I don't have to delve into the why. I don't have to, well, because they did this, but just for a minute, like what situation brought this up? What situation sort of maybe triggered this to be going on right now? It's coming up, or maybe it's people that I'm around that sort of trigger a space for me. Just like, and we don't have to solve it in that very moment, but like, let's recognize it. Let's pause for a second. And let's like, it's almost like stepping back from your life for a moment, just to be like looking at yourself from above and be like, all right, what is going on here? We give so much of our power and control away to visible and invisible forces in our life. And then we try to take power and control away from people in situations that we have no power and control over. There's a huge irony in there. And so when we start to notice ourselves, like, what's going on, and these little things, like little things over time, and we don't perfect them immediately, but we're like, all right, I do this often. Why am I doing this? And some great ways just to create self-awareness, just getting present, taking our power and control back, asking ourselves a few questions, and getting ready to make those 1-degree shifts. What am I going to do differently next time?
Yes. And I love that, like the introspection part too, because I do think reflective work is very helpful in really kind of cultivating your self-awareness, being able to look back at maybe the day and say, okay, where were the places that I was maybe on autopilot and I wasn't actually consciously choosing what was next for me? What was a situation where I felt that I was maybe not my best self in that? And journaling around that. And I know everybody's not about journaling. It doesn't have to be written down. I'm a big proponent of journaling because I think a second benefit to it is you can go back and you can read your journal entries and it shows you how far you've come, right? Like, oh, look at where I was 6 months ago when I started this, to develop my self-awareness to where I am now. And that's a huge win, huge motivator to keep you going on the journey of becoming more and more self-aware.
Yeah. And I think we'd like to think we remember, but journaling can be very helpful. And like, all right, I wrote it down. It can also be very helpful in a way to remind ourselves, even when we're on a really good day, like when you're feeling good, like this is what's going on in the day and you're feeling really good. So when the days you're not feeling really good, you're like reminded of like, all right, there are good days, there are good things. It's very powerful. I am not a journaler, so I think it's very powerful. I have all the best intentions. I've got like 3 next to my bed. I have my journal for like not the great things because I don't want to mix it up with my journal for the good. I have all sorts of stuff, and but yes, just having that introspection.
Yes. And however anybody else wants to do it, you figure out what works best for you. I am the same way. I have multiple journals, it's focused around different things because I don't want to mix all the things together. I got to focus it. The other thing that I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper on, we've talked about it several times, and I know we talked about this in the episode that you did in season 1 around values, and that we always start with values as the foundation for any coaching client. I think there's a lot of methodologies that can be used to determine your values. Yeah. So I'm curious to like, how do you normally do that work? Is it the list of here's all the values and like let your top 5 or 6, whatever? This is still a debatable topic for me, how many you should be allowed to have.
As many as you want.
I don't care. But let your heart speak to you in those values. Several other people have mentioned like looking at somebody that you admire and what is it that you admire about that person. Others do more of like a reflective kind of practice of like, so let's say that the end of your life has come. What would you want people to say about you at your funeral? And that's speaking to the kind of person that you were. So I'm just curious as to what methods you've used.
they're all methods and they're all great methods. And I think it just depends on the type of person that you're with, right? Like there's no one size fits all. This is the way to do it. Me, I'm a visual, like for me, I like the words on paper and a little definition to like, I like to get the feel of it. I like to like circle it and think about it for a moment and like have a moment to think like, where does this fit? I agree with you. We talk about top 5, top 10. You can, but
we don't care.
I think the point is, it's like we spend so much time living other people's values and expectations, or thinking certain like, oh, of course this is a value. And when we take that moment and we say, is it really a value? Like, and you know, what are my real values, no matter how you get to it, whether it's someone you admire, whether it's at your funeral, what people are saying about you, if it's a word on a piece of paper that stands out. I think it's just to get to something that gets to you. Because I do believe that, like, there are just these beautiful pieces of us that along the way we have let go of, we've ignored because of societal expectations, cultural standards, religious beliefs, families, friends, like all these things that push us to put us into a box so that we all fit and everyone lives happily ever after. Meanwhile, we have incredible rates of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, like all these things are happening simultaneously. And yet we've tried to make everyone into this like perfect thing. And however you need to get to what's most important to you, just do something, right? Just do something.
Yeah. And Rachel has been very gracious. So we're adding some resources to the show notes, some links to portions of the workbook that you use with your keynote speeches and workshops. And that is a values exploration tool. So we will be sure to link that in there. Thank you, Rachel, for being so generous to share that with our listeners.
Of course. There's also some self-awareness questions in there, just some
Fantastic.
starters, some things to think about, you know, just to
wonderful.
Start the head, the brain, the juices flowing on certain things.
Get the wheels turning in the right direction.
Yes.
I also do want to say too, on the just touching back to the values and, you know, finding however many values make you happy. And this just comes from a personal experience on my part, is that I think the values have to be fluid in a sense of maybe you've got 5 or 6 core values, but there's all these other values, right, that matter to you. And you can go through phases in life, seasons of life, things that happen in your life that are out of your control.
Yep.
And there may be some of those values that aren't the top 5 or 6 list, but that need to be paid attention to. And so I think anytime you go through a big, massive life change, an identity change, that's a fantastic time to go back to the values tool and say, okay, these are my core values. And it's not saying get rid of them. It's maybe just saying like, this one's more important. This fringe value over here is more important to me right now. So it's just going to come in to the core so I can give it the focus and the attention that it needs.
Yes.
I think it's super important.
Yeah. They're not rigid and they're not ever like changing. Yeah. But if I think about the values I had growing up, like they're good values. Like we had good, you know, good family values. And I still think they're good values. They're just not where I am today in my life, right? We're all in different seasons of our life and certain things matter in a different way. That's that check-in, that self-awareness piece that I come back to self to realize. And if we're finding ourselves disconnected, tired a lot, like angry, upset, like we know we've stepped away from our values. Like we know our values are not getting touched. Like there's clear signals, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, where like, oh, that's a clear hit that like one of my values right now is not being acknowledged. And I love that you said that, like they're not rigid and final. They are forever. And that self-awareness piece I want to talk about too is like, when we were young, we were introduced to a tremendous amount of information about the way the world worked. Everything from families to jobs to relationships to health. And we processed all that with our child brain. And we've taken a lot of those beliefs along the way. And the self-awareness journey is a lot of that is this true? Is this belief helping me, not helping? And digging into the rules and the stories and the beliefs and the things to be like, where, now that I'm processing it with my adult brain, what makes more sense? And that's all part of the journey. And there's no right or wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
No
There's
right
no
or
right or wrong way to be you.
there's no right way to be you. Like, and it's okay. And like you mentioned before, the identity starts to get hit. Like, well, what does this mean about me and my life and who I am and where I'm going? And it's okay. You processed a lot of big information with a very young brain, and it's okay to reprocess that information now to be where you are, because you're really just heading into the best version of who you are.
Yeah. Yes. It gets better.
That's
what I will say. It gets better.
I will say, no matter how hard it's been, like it's always better. Like it is always better. And the people who've come into my life, the experiences that have come into my life, like all that, I couldn't have dreamed that. I couldn't have made it up if I tried. So it is a journey, but it's like, wow.
Yep. You have no idea what's in store for you. And I'm excited to see what's in store for everybody.
Me too.
It just gets better from here.